Hello, my whole grain baking friends. Today I've got something really special to share with you. I've finally mastered an easy and reliable recipe for buckwheat sourdough bread. I got the idea for this recipe from watching all of those videos that were going around a few years ago about bread made with rice batter. And it turns out that this approach also works pretty well for buckwheat. So this is a nice, simple, gluten-free sourdough option for those of you who need it. But I can say that even if you're a wheat bread lover, you will probably like this too. This is probably the best gluten-free sourdough that I've ever made, and it doesn't have the characteristics that a lot of gluten-free sourdough breads often have. Anyway, if you are new to my videos, hi, my name is Ellie. I'm from Brisbane in Australia, and I share videos across two channels on YouTube, Ellie's Everyday Soap Making and this channel, Ellie's Everyday Whole Grain Sourdough. It's really great to have you with me today. I hope you enjoy this recipe and give it a try yourself sometime. You can easily make this buckwheat bread with a pinch of yeast instead of sourdough, but I'm a big sourdough fan, so I'll be demonstrating that method here. And I'll put all of the details for this recipe up on my website and place a link to that in the video description. Let's get into it. To make this bread, you'll need either 500 grams of buckwheat flour, as fresh and unrefined as you can get it, or if you're like me and you mill your own flour at home, you'll need 500 grams of hulled buckwheat to mill into flour. You can probably buy buckwheat whole with the hulls still on, but in my experience, they are very, very coarse and difficult to eat. So just use whole but hulled buckwheat. It should be a nice light sort of greeny, bluey, creamy colour. It's hard to describe actually. I use a Mockmill 200 made in Germany. I use that for all of my home flour milling, and I bought my mill back in 2018 and it was a fantastic investment. I use it every week, at least once or twice. If you're interested in looking into mock mills or learning about it, I will put some links about this as well in the video description. This recipe comes together very easily. Start with your 500 grams of buckwheat flour in a medium to large sized mixing bowl. Then add to that 1 1/3 teaspoons of salt, which is about 8 grams. Mix the salt through really thoroughly into the flour, and then you'll need to add some sourdough starter of some kind or a pinch of yeast. This bread recipe is going to work either way. Lately, I've been feeding my sourdough starter with oats, which is another story for another day. But you can also use a gluten-free starter, a wheat sourdough starter, a spelt or a rye or any kind of sourdough starter you like or anyone that you have. Because it's wintertime here in Australia, my kitchen's quite cold and I want this bread to ferment reasonably quickly, so I added about 2/3 of a cup of my currently oat-fed sourdough starter. If it was summertime, I'd probably add less. And the last time I made this recipe, I used about a tablespoon of wheat starter, and this recipe just turned out just as well. It's really fantastic. It doesn't matter how much sourdough starter you use, just know that the more that you add to the mixture, the faster it will ferment. Once you've got the salt and the starter in with the flour, it's time to add the final ingredient, the water. In this recipe, we're making a batter rather than a traditional dough texture, so you'll need enough water to make a really thick batter. On this day, I used 500 grams of water, which is 500 mils or about 2 cups filtered tap water, and that worked out pretty good. Your buckwheat flour might absorb more or less water than mine did, so I would recommend starting with 1.5 cups of water or around 375 mils, and then just keep adding a little bit more if you need to bring it up to that thick batter consistency. I have to confess, I thought I'd added too much water to my mixture, so I sprinkled a little bit of psyllium husk into it and mixed that in as well, but that is not necessary at all. I've made this bread a number of times now and never added the psyllium husk to it, and it's turned out just great. But if you do accidentally add a little bit too much water, or you feel like it doesn't look thick enough, you can add a little bit of extra flour or some psyllium husk or even some chia seeds, anything like that that will help sort of just absorb a little bit of that extra water. Anyway, it turns out really good either way. The trick is not to worry about it too much. You just want a thick batter, and that will do quite nicely. So make sure your batter is mixed really well until there are no lumps remaining and everything is well incorporated, and then cover your bowl while the batter ferments. Once my batter is mixed, I then like to feed my sourdough starter to get it ready for storage and for the next bake. Because I'm feeding mine with oats at the moment, prior to that I was feeding it with wheat, and you can change what you feed your starter with. But because I've been feeding mine with oats, I've been adding about 3/4 of a cup of rolled oats, then just enough water to make a thick, raw, oaty porridge consistency. And make sure you check the video description for links to more of my videos about sourdough starters, using fermented oats for bread and all that stuff. I've got a lot to say about all of these topics. But once your starter is fed and mixed, whatever you're feeding it with, leave it alongside the bread bowl for the day to reactivate, let it get bubbly, and then it can go back into the fridge for the next bake. The next step is where we leave the dough, or the batter in this case, to ferment while we go on with our day and do other things. Depending on the temperature at your place and how much starter you used, this could take anywhere between 3 and 12 hours or even longer in cold weather. My kitchen was fairly cool this morning, so I preheated my oven for a minute, then turned it off again, and then kept my dough in there just to speed things up a little bit. You don't want a really warm environment though. And in summertime, I'd actually use cold water in this mixture so that it didn't get too warm. Sourdough, you don't want it to be too warm, or it can over ferment. You can also leave this batter overnight to ferment if the weather isn't too hot at your place. That's a nice method that I like to use in wintertime as well. You'll know that your batter is ready to turn into bread when the dough has risen up in the bowl a little bit. If you have a glass bowl, you can look for the tiny bubbles in the batter, and you should also see that the top of the batter has a slightly domed, risen shape. You might even see a few little bubbles popping out on the top surface of the batter. Make sure you smell it too. When it's fully fermented, it should smell really nice, like a fresh sourdough starter. Or if you used a pinch of yeast instead of sourdough, it should smell nice and ripe and yeasty. As soon as your batter looks ready, preheat your oven to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 Fahrenheit. It is optional, but I like to bake my tinned bread loaves inside a roasting dish inside my oven, and this helps to add steam around the bread, giving it a better rise, generally speaking. If you're using this method, preheat the roaster along with the oven. While you're waiting for the oven to preheat, grease your loaf pan. I couldn't decide which loaf pan to use, but I ended up going with the small tin, which turned out perfectly. You're looking for a tin or a pan that will hold at least 1.2 litres of liquid, and this pan is approximately 20 by 10 by 8 centimeters, just for reference. Once your oven is preheated, and mine takes about 15 minutes to come to temperature, then we get to the fun part. This step is what makes this bread recipe so easy to make. All we do here is gently spoon this fermented buckwheat batter into our loaf pan and bake the bread. Use a big flat spoon if you've got one, or you might even be able to gently pour the batter into the pan, but either way, handle it as gently as you can to preserve the air bubbles inside the batter. This is what keeps the loaf fairly light. Whatever you do, don't stir the batter once it's bubbly. You want to retain all of those nice bubbles as much as you can while you're spooning it into the pan. Then once you have the batter in the pan, and it is okay to fill the pan right up to the top as I've done, this bread will just rise a little bit further above that and it'll be a nice big loaf. Then place it into the oven and bake it for about 1 hour. This bread is not going to brown very much, but you will still have to bake it thoroughly. I find about an hour is good all up. And because I baked mine inside my roaster, I did the initial bake for 50 minutes and then another 10 minutes uncovered, and then a final 5 minutes with the bread I took out of the tin. But honestly, you do not have to fuss over your bread as much as I did. If you want, you can just put that tin straight into your oven and leave it there for the whole hour. Maybe check it after 50 minutes if you're not sure, because ovens do vary. You just want to make sure that it's baked until it's getting a little bit brown and it sounds hollow inside when you tap the bottom of the loaf. About an hour at 220 should do pretty well. And that's it. This bread is very flavorful, very delicious, and it's a perfect, easy way to bake 100% whole grain buckwheat sourdough. I enjoyed a few slices of this the next day with my homegrown avocado and some fermented nut cheese spread that I made, and my goodness, it was very, very good. This bread recipe is on regular rotation for us now, for sure. Thanks for coming along with me for this recipe today. I hope you enjoyed it, and please tell me in the comments what you think, and don't forget to check out all the links and other info about what I get up to in the description box. I'll see you again soon.